Hi, John. This is my long promised response to your Virginia Tech rant 4 months after you posted it. And I've actually printed out a little bit of an outline here, so maybe this will be shorter than my usual and maybe a little bit more focused. I'm not sure. Probably not. I gotta be me. First of all, I would take issue with a couple of the examples you give in your video. I don't think that modern senseless gun massacres can be compared meaningfully to events from the Old West or Prohibition America. The psychology was different, the social environment was different, and the guns were much less deadly. But if I were to argue those kinds of issues with you, this would just end up being another debate about the various pros and cons of whether we should have more gun control, less gun control. And I don't want this video to be about that. I want it to be about why neither you nor I nor practically anyone in the United States will ever be happy with U.S. gun policy. Now, I started out as a gun control supporter. It seemed to make sense to me, and the people on the other side seemed to be heavily sprinkled with nuts. But as the years have gone by and gun control has been shown to be nearly impossible to enforce, and as I've heard more and more of the counter arguments for what would make for a better, safer America, I am beginning to come around to the idea that if there were a national gun policy that did not change from state to state, that basically involved every U.S. citizen who had not been convicted of a crime being allowed to own guns, and being allowed to apply for a concealed, being eligible, I should say, for a concealed weapon permit, that perhaps this kind of a nation, where everyone knew that some law-abiding citizen in any given location might have a gun on them, and that this might actually decrease the level of violence in society, that criminals would be less inclined to try to hold someone up if they weren't sure that the person didn't have a gun, that even crazies, even lunatics with big satchels full of machine guns and what have you would think twice about walking into a room and opening fire for fear that somebody might fire back. And even if they weren't afraid, even if they remained crazy and didn't care about their own lives and were suicidal, there would be that much more of a chance that someone in that room would have a gun, and that the killing would come to a stop much earlier, and lives would be saved. In other words, the gun rights advocate argument for a more peaceful, law-abiding United States is making more and more sense to me, personally. But I don't think it matters, because the gun control controversy in the United States is a business. Gun controversy and gun hysteria is a sector of the economy. It seems so obvious that maybe it sounds so simplistic that I don't have to explain it, but I'll explain it anyway. The people who drive the defense of gun rights and the people who drive the push for gun control are all paid to do so. They're whatever volunteers are involved in this debate are way down the food chain and are marshaled and organized and goaded into action by people who are paid for this, and organizations that are that derive their funding from this specific battle. As long as the battle goes on, the money comes in. If the battle were to fade away, the money would go out. Now, this is very glib, and it applies to many other things, and actually this is sort of like a stub of a much larger video subject I'd like to get into, hopefully sooner rather than later. But in general, this is a problem I think we can all appreciate and all understand, that if you sincerely believe that gun control is the way to make America safer and better, and you have the skills to promote that agenda, and you get a job trying to create gun control laws, clearly it is to your advantage for that problem to remain for you to continue to try to solve. And similarly, if you work for the NRA or any of the other organizations and you're pulling down a salary in the six figures or more, you depend on the crazy crack-brained gun control advocates who are trying to steal our freedoms for your livelihood. And even if these organizations are so-called non-profit organizations, it's not non-profit to you if you're pulling down six figures a year. So in a very glib sort of spy versus spy way, the gun control advocates and the gun rights advocates, the professionals, need each other. And this, of course, is true of so many other things, so many other aspects of society. The dentists need the candy makers and blah 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 blah. It's a pretty obvious kind of glib point to make, but I think the thing to keep in mind specifically about gun policy is that let us say there really was a specific gun policy, that if people could just work their way down to it and agree on it, and it was established throughout the nation, let's say that policy would create the least gun violence, the most safety, the most sense of security for the American people, and keep the bad guys as under control as possible, that there was a policy like that. And for the sake of this argument, let us say that that's the gun rights policy, the policy that in sentimental terms is defended by the gun industry, by the NRA, by all gun rights advocates, by people who feel that a flag and a gun are practically the same thing, the stars and stripes and the blue steel, whatever. Let us say, for the sake of argument, that is the solution, that would make a more peaceful America, a safer America, and a less fearful, less anxious American people. If that were the case, the gun industry would not want that to happen. They would certainly not want that to happen. And by want, in this case, I mean it would not be in their best interest for it to happen. I'm not talking here about an evil cabal of sinister people, determined to make their living off blood money. I'm talking about people who don't want criminals to be shooting anybody who don't want to live in a violent world and all this, but they're in the gun business. The gun business depends on fear and anxiety, because the gun business is not based on every sensible individual owning one gun to defend themselves effectively against criminals. The gun business is based on people who are obsessed with guns, people who are addicted to guns, buying vast numbers of guns, and generally buying them because they're in a panic, either that the forces of communist gun control are going to take away their guns, so they have to hoard them, or criminals are, closing in on them, so they have to defend themselves, or the government is evil, so they've got to be ready to, refresh the tree of liberty with somebody else's blood. And all of that kind of psychology, it's called advertising. It's the same, it is the essential advertising ingredient for selling guns. Think I'm lying? Check out the gun sales statistics, if you can find straight statistics, from 1968 on. 68 was the first really divisive gun control law in the United States, national gun control law. Came on the heels of the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, and the riots by black folk, which scared the white people, and all of a sudden you actually had this gun control law. And the NRA, which previous to that had been, well, I don't really know that much about it, but the impression that I get from what I've read is that the NRA was a fairly reasonable advocacy group for gun owners, and participated in gun safety type stuff, and that was, was a lobbying group, but was not a not locked in a death struggle with its opponents. But after 68, the NRA and other groups began to specifically nurture gun nutism as a valuable ally in their fight against greater gun control. And from 1968, you see gun sales go up. You also see gun violence go up, as you also see gun control go up. So we have more gun control, more gun violence, more gun nuts, advertising like crazy, and all sorts of weird allies you wouldn't expect, like the film industry. I mean, if you're not a gun nut yourself, and if you're not buying gun magazines, when was the last time you saw an ad for a gun? Well, I give you a hint: in a movie theater or on TV. Solve your problem with a gun. That's and these messages tend to be brought to you by people who are, tarred as left liberals the rest of the time. But basically, what it boils down to is the frenzy sells guns. A safe and sane approach to using guns to lessen fear, increase safety, and make everybody less anxious would decrease gun sales, and not in some insignificant way either. Now, so what am I saying? Am I saying there's like a big conspiracy that the gun control people and the NRA are secretly in cahoots to support each other, and that everybody is laughing all the way to the bank, taking their cut of the gun industry's bloated profits? No, absolutely not. This is a kind of a Darwinian natural selection sort of perspective on why everyone wants to solve the problem, but the problem either gets worse or seems to be getting worse when it's actually not. In many cases, you look through the statistics, and you find that, oh, well, gee, wow, gun violence has actually gone down. Why don't I hear more of that? Because it's not in the interest of either side to be making that claim. The gun control advocates want, you to feel that we need more gun control, and the gun rights advocates want you to feel that you need more guns, and that gun control isn't working. So it ends up being advertising. It's world wrestling, maybe someday someone will somehow get in charge of world wrestling, who comes up with the brilliant idea of having, professional wrestling with only good guys. Get rid of the bad guys. And that will be the end of professional wrestling. But the gun control industry and the gun rights industry and the gun manufacturing and sales industries are, like it or not, and in a sense, and certainly unintentionally at the start, in bed with each other to keep the brouhaha going. So what you'll see is gun control advocates advocating seemingly anti-gun policies that in fact would encourage more gun sales. They don't want a lot of people killed. That's not the point at all. But that, people have a sliding IQ. It goes up and down depending on what they want to or don't want to face up to about what they're doing. So, you'll say, oh, well, the NRA will support the police destroying masses of confiscated guns, confiscated from criminals. Well, all those guns will be replaced. Destroying them creates demand for new guns. The one group of people who don't ever have their guns stolen by criminals are gun manufacturers, and if they do, they have insurance. Basically, the only people the gun manufacturers, the only criminals the gun manufacturers fear are, confiscatory officials. When Virginia Tech happened, I didn't even watch, because I've been through this so many times before. But when Columbine happened, I sat in front of the TV from the moment I heard about it until, the bodies started coming out of the windows, and, and I remember watching this, the helicopter shots of the SWAT team circling and circling the school, afraid to go in, not knowing what was happening inside. And all I could think was, 30 years ago, we didn't have SWAT teams. SWAT teams have special training. SWAT teams have special equipment. When Charles Whitman went crazy and started shooting people from the Texas University clock tower in Austin, regular old policemen, idiots, guys who had no special training, stumbled up and killed him, And when the Watts riots happened, they had to call in the National Guard, and those were pretty much the instigators for the SWAT teams. And since then, there have been countless other mini industries that have sprung up around protecting us from increasing violence. These are not industries that are going to get your hard-earned dollar in an environment of decreasing violence and an increasing sense of safety, where everyone starts becoming a, spoiled, coddled, left liberal weenie who thinks that the world isn't out to get them, you know? So a violent world supports all those industries. You know, the the security bar industry, the security guard industry, which is just blown up since the 60s. Do any one of these industries, can any one of these industries be a Machiavellian force to increase the violence and conflict in society? Not individually in any given way, but the cumulative need for a livelihood for all these people who are supposedly at odds with one another, but in reality support one another without meaning to even, is going to cause, in my opinion, this problem to just this perceived problem of gun control to go on and on and on. You know, after 9/11, there was of course a spike of gun purchases, but it leveled off very quickly and it went away. And after the fact, they discovered that they did some studies and they discovered that most of the guns had been bought by people who already had a lot of guns. So there's a real problem right now in the gun industry, a problem that can't be immediately solved. You know, when you're, you know, if you're making a movie and you want people to be all excited about your movie, you can advertise up a storm. But you know, when the problem is how people feel that they're going to solve their problems, their problems of violence, you can't really be seen to be increasing the anxiety of the society. You have to look for somebody else who's doing it, and you need that other person. Somebody, I forget who it was, when the Brady Bill was about to go through, again, huge spike in gun sales, not to new gun owners, but to people who were afraid that they weren't going to be able to get more guns, you know, after the Brady Bill came through. And somebody with the gun lobby, one of the gun lobbies, you know, was quoted as saying, you know, this is the best advertising we've had in years, you know, that kind of snarky, jokey thing. Somebody said that in Fahrenheit 9/11 too, about arms sales and Iraq. He said, you know, God, it's a tragedy, but it's great for us. Ha ha ha. Just kidding. You know, have I made my point? I think the longer I go on with it, the more glib it will sound, but I think it's actually deeper than I can describe. And as like I say, this is like a first run at a more general video about this topic. But I'll just end on one other note. Last year, again, I was sitting in front of the TV watching the aftermath of a tragedy. In this case, it was the Amish schoolhouse shooting. And the press, who of course benefit from all tragedies, you know, of course they don't cause them, but they benefit from it. So it's only natural that the press should attempt to blow every milk as much out of every tragedy as possible. So the press is honing in on the Amish, but because of the Amish, the weird special status of the Amish, you could just feel the frustration of the media who were being denied the interviews that they would have expected with all the you know, the victims and the traumatized survivors and the lawyers of the traumatized survivors. You could just feel that all they could get was a shot of these, you know, people walking down the sidewalk to the meeting house. You know, I mean, walking down the side of the road to the meeting house, and it's like, you know, this is just not right. This can't be. And you know, and I just sat there watching this, and I'm going, you know, there's a whole industry of grief counselors that didn't exist 35, 40 years ago. It's been it's been almost 10 years since Columbine, so what didn't exist 30 years ago now didn't exist 40. For 40 years, these things have been growing. You know, did the Amish turn to the grief counseling industry? You know, was there someone on the periphery saying, you know, geez, we got to do something to prevent this from ever happening again? You know, the Amish need an Amish SWAT team. The Amish need metal detectors at their school. And the Amish didn't. They just went about their way. And, you know, if another psycho decides to go after the Amish, maybe that'll begin to break the vapor lock on their commercial potential as victims of violence. But instead they forgave the guy who killed everyone, and they you know, circled in around their own people, and I just found myself wondering, you know, what would be left of our society if we solved our problems or refused to rise to the temptation of adjusting to them.